Welcome to Under the Fig Tree podcast. In today's episode, hosts Reverend Micah Glenn and Reverend Dr. Ben Haupt talk theology and life as they meditate under the fig tree.
What's up? Welcome back to another episode of Under the Fig Tree. Today, no Ben, but I'm joined by Reverend Tom Schlund, one of our admissions officers who you all have met in a previous episode. And if you didn't watch the episode, him and Reverend Jesse Keeker were on together, but we're also joined by Dr. Charles Arand. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a joy. And I usually, Tom, how are you as well?
I'm doing great, too. I've gotten promoted up off the couch into the chair.
So I, just quick set things. I argued for 4 chairs like this, but the couch has like it's a little different thing. And everyone's like, oh, officer different. It's part of the set.
Space for the set.
It's fine. But these chairs, I've sat there. The chairs are more comfortable. I'll just be honest. But Dr. Charles Arand is, I'm not going to continue to call you Dr. Charles Arand.
That's fine. Chuck is fine.
Yeah. Well, and this is good for hearers. At one point when we graduated, every professor was like, when you graduate, I get my first name back in our relationship. But once I enrolled into advanced studies, in my mind, it just goes back. With the exception of Dr. Kolb, one day he said, just call me Bob. I was like, I don't think I can, Dr. Kolb. But
I had that experience with an Old Testament prof, Horace Hummel.
Sure.
And if anyone knew him or had him, he could put the fear into you, especially with regard to the Old Testament. And I remember the first time he said, call me Horace. And it's like, no. Yeah. I can't do that.
Well, my dad was a Marine and a drill instructor. So for me, it's just, until I was 11, I lived on a military base. It's just first culture. Like it's sir, ma'am, that's language. And so whenever I'm speaking to even a young woman, I'll say ma'am, and they're like, ma'am makes me sound old. I'm like, well, I guess, but I'm just showing, this is respect from me to you. Well, Dr. Arand, you teach systematics at the seminary, which is like our fancy academic way of saying the doctrine, the teachings of the church.
Yes. Another way of putting it is you get the big picture. You see how everything fits together.
Right.
You see how the entire story of God and His creation fit together. One of the ways I've thought about it is someone who does exegesis or here at the seminary, I tend to think of exegesis as a little bit more like if you're walking up a mountain, you're stopping to look at every flower, every petal, every detail along the way. A systematician is one who climbs and then on top of the mountain stands and looks at the entire landscape. Yeah. And you see how the plains move into the foothills, how the foothills move into the mountains, that kind of big picture.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a great image to think about as you think about how everything is organized together.
Well, even in that same illustration, there's a way of like the historians are the ones who tell the story of the person climbing the mountain.
Yep.
And the practical guys are the ones that tell you the tools you need to get up.
Oh, nice. I like how you're running with that image.
Got it all fit together.
We try, especially for our hearers who are thinking about these things, to show like why do we have practical theology, historical theology, systematic theology, doctrinal, and biblical theology. And then once you get to advanced studies, PhD work and beyond, you begin to specialize. But in our Master of Divinity program, and even in all of our programs that lead to ordination or deaconess certification, you have to learn a little bit of all of them. Because they all work
together
so that you can do ministry. So when somebody says, well, why do we do this thing in the church this way? And if there's a historical foundation, that it also is a biblical foundation for why we speak a certain way, why we confess our faith a certain way, all of that is
And I think sometimes when students are coming in, they look at the curriculum and they feel like it seems like a lot, that you got to do 3 years of classes and you got to take all of these classes from all these different parts. And once you start to see how they all fit together like that, it makes more and more sense how that's helpful. And it's not just here, let's give us the basics and go, but let's really form you for ministry.
Well, at the risk of my analogy running amok,
okay,
because you've developed it very nicely. I might say a systematician also is attuned to the storm clouds on the horizon that are coming our way.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we must engage is what are those challenges that are coming down the road that we see in the culture around us, or the questions or misunderstandings of the faith or what Christianity is and so forth. And, so it's not just like putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, it's also taking into account how are we going to address or deal with those weather patterns or storms coming in.
Well, and they seem to come in bigger and bigger waves as time moves forward. Well, one thing, so we have doctrinal theology. Eventually, in the episode, we're going to be, talking about the three ecumenical creeds. And in both the apostles and I would say namely in the Nicene Creed, well, probably both. I'm always up for correction. We have these different articles. There's first article, God the Father, which we typically would also say is creation. God the Son, Jesus, the atonement, redemption, and then we have the Spirit, third article theology, sanctification, the church, and the like. I think maybe you're going to add to that or correct me. But I was going to say that you're kind of a creation first article kind of specialist around here.
Yeah, I suppose. You're absolutely right about the first, second, and third article. And if you think about it, that kind of gives you the big picture in a snapshot sort of way from creation to the return of Christ. So that'd be an example of what we were talking about. Similarly, in the last couple of decades, I have focused on creation. And again, that's largely a response to a perceived need. Yeah. So when I look at the 20th century, I can't say that there was a lot done on the doctrine of creation.
Okay.
Now, that might surprise people because it's like, well, wait a minute, creation, evolution, that's a big, big deal. Well, yes, that got a lot of attention, and that deals with the question of origins. But it also tended to, because of the focus on that, it also tended to truncate or reduce the fullness of a doctrine of creation to the question of origins.
Yeah.
And thus lose sight of things perhaps like providence or God's ongoing work in creation or our responsibility and stewardship of creation. And so there's just a lot more that the doctrine of creation entails.
Right.
Similarly, more recently, I've been thinking about that kind of language because I use it all the time. I've used it now for 40 years, first article, second article, third article. I remember writing a CTCR document on spiritual gifts where I used that framework to think about the relationship of natural talents to spiritual gifts. More recently, though, I've begun thinking that when we move in a linear way from first to second or third, we tend to leave the former one behind.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's perhaps better to think of creation, or think of the three articles as concentric circles. The outer circle is the doctrine of creation. It's the context and horizon of everything. The second article breaks in and is sort of the center circle within creation of Christ breaking in. And then the work of Christ begins to expand outward like ripples in a pond to the third article, which brings about the renewal of all creation. So the idea then is you cannot talk about Christ or the Holy Spirit, redemption or sanctification. You cannot talk about those apart from talking about creation.
You're speaking my language in multiple ways, and I, for some reason, I've said this a little bit on the podcast, and so I'm in the doctrinal theology department. Dr. Leo Sanchez is my supervisor. I took his class on pneumatology, Holy Spirit, third article stuff, and we're talking about the needs, the theological needs and context of our time, and just honestly, the Lutheran Church.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Here and back to the Reformation, we're behind on our development of third article theology. very far behind. Well, about 50 years ago, Pentecostalism arose and it exploded all over the place.
Right.
We had a lot of reactionary stuff, but it was reacting to what they were saying, not necessarily developing what we were meant to say. And then Dr. Sanchez comes along and he engages with spirit Christology, which involves creation, specifically talking about the humanity of Jesus, that he became a creature. And so the topic of my dissertation, and I won't go into deep details, this is happy, we're happy to do it in the academy, but for our hearers, it's on charismatic gifts. And so I read that CTCR document, and there are a lot of really beneficial things in there, because that was one of those things. I was doing a research paper for that class with Dr. Sanchez on charismatic gifts, and I was reading these books, and it would be like, here's a spiritual gift inventory. Are you good at math? Are you a accountant? Maybe you should be the treasurer for your church. I was like, but what does that have to do with the Spirit?
Yeah, and for me, it was sort of like some of the books I had read were like someone who becomes a Christian acquires the spiritual gift of music. And it was like, so they could not play chopsticks on the piano at home, but they come into church and now they can play Bach. And there was another example that I ran across was the story of one of the most successful car salesmen in California who became a Christian and went on to become the most successful evangelist in California. And I'm like, so there's no connection here but between his ability and his personality and social skills to deal with customers and selling cars, and his personality and social skills in talking to people about the gospel. It's like, come on, you don't check your brain, you don't check your personality at the door of the church when you come into the church.
Exactly.
It's something that the Spirit then can take and use in the service of the gospel.
Right. Yeah, but exactly, the ability to speak in front of crowds itself isn't the spiritual gift. It's the Spirit using a first article gift.
Exactly.
For the advancement of the gospel.
But if you have that skill already and you put it to the use of the gospel, then all of a sudden you can accomplish great things.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, and this is where first article theology comes in, because I mean, for a lot of good reasons, people, especially because in Lutheran theology we focus a lot on the atonement, Jesus, second article. I mean, that's a lot of, I mean, most of the Book of Concord, not exclusively, is dealing with that, because that was the question of the day, the need of the time, figuring out how do we give comfort to these poor peasants historically, assurance and comfort that in the midst of the plague and death and all this other stuff, poverty, that they can have comfort where comfort is meant to be given.
Well, and what you're saying is really important. And I suppose this is where historical theology and systematic theology converge or come into play. Because unlike our day, I think most people in Luther's day lived with an ever-present sense of death around them.
Yeah.
You have high infant mortality rates. You have low life expectancy. You mentioned the plague. You have all these dangers. And so there's, I think, a lively sense that you need to prepare for death.
Right.
Whereas we can pretty much put it out of our mind for most of our lives. I'm thinking more about it now that I turned 66 a couple of weeks ago, but for most of my life, it was like, oh, it's down in the future. I don't think when I get sick that, oh, I might die because I know I can get an antibiotic, or, there's that kind of stuff. So I think, you're right on target there.
And even the dying process, we kind of sanitize and put people in a hospital or in a hospice home. We let the funeral home take care of it. We don't even really have to encounter.
Speaking as someone who comes from a long line of funeral directors, I can
Sure.
Well, I just think about my time in the parish, about how separated that was from anybody at their home. You think about back a few generations and having people die in their homes, or even having the funeral or visitation at home, that we've been able to put it even beyond arm's length now.
Yeah.
But talking about storms in the forefront, you'd be hard pressed to say, well, are there challenges to solely focusing the life of a Christian on the atonement and nothing else? Well, part of that is that well, Christ died for my sins. When I die, I won't go to hell. And we begin to then forget that there's this other thing called the resurrection of the body, which is given to us here and now, the assurance of it spiritually via our baptism, but it's also a physical thing that's going to happen. So again, all three articles of the creed, systematically, we separate them to talk about them respectively. But in all systematics, if you've broken the pieces apart and they don't come back together, well, you've done it wrong.
Nicely put. Yeah, and I'm going to pick up a little bit on your point about the atonement and then tying it to the third article with the resurrection of the body. Something that I think weighs on me these days, recent years, is this. You can't have a good solid sense of the atonement or redemption or what that means without a solid sense of what it means for God to be creator, because that's sort of the presupposition. And because, we talk about, God saving us, whether it's from sin or from hell or God's wrath. That presupposes a certain vision of God and a certain vision of God as creator. Maybe a way of getting at this is, I have a very simplistic view of human history. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes like this. For all of human history, every person, every family has sought to secure their lives, to put food on the table, roof over the head, to live in relative peace with neighbors and within the community. In order to do that, you have to gain some control over your environment.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to have water for the crops to give you food. You need control over the insects that can destroy everything. You can't have armies marching across the fields. You need to be able to store food for them, but you need some control over your environment. How do you get control over your environment, to have that personal security? Well, for most of human history and almost every religion, divine forces control the environment.
Oh, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you want to gain control of the environment, you have to gain control of the divine forces. And that means sometimes sacrifices.
Yeah.
You find that, whether it's with Aztecs or, probably in almost every religion, or at the very least, you got to pray, placate the divine forces, however you want to put it, mm-hmm. so that you can harness their power to control the environment. In our day, though, we've gained control of the environment.
Right.
We don't need to harness divine forces.
Most days we think we have, but
Grant, but we live in.
It's well taken. Like, it is very, like, exactly we can hide from tornadoes.
Tornadoes, insects. Yeah, I mean, I may go outside and there's a skink, or every once in a while I find a snake in the backyard or something like that. But by and large, I'm not threatened by forests or.
No. Well, even like you were saying, with
irrigate your crops.
Yeah,
exactly.
With even with the human condition, death. I mean, life expectancy. There can't have ever been another time in human history where people live as long as we do. We say when somebody dies at 50, they've died young.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we think of, famines. Well, okay, if there's sort of a famine in the Midwest, food might go up in price a little bit, but we'll just get it from somewhere else in the world.
Exactly.
And so it's not like I'm worried about, are we going to have enough to get through the winter,
right,
or anything like that. And so there seems to me in the past, there was this sense of divine forces controlling the environment, and that meant that people had, Dr. Coleman and I talked about this a lot. I think he wrote a post on it somewhere too. What Rudolf Otto, now he sort of studied the history of natural religions, but talks about the Old Testament as well, had this sense of, I don't know if I want to call it sort of a terrifying mystery of divine. In other words, you're very much aware of divine forces in the world, and things like tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, illnesses, whatever it might be, are frightening. Or they put a certain fear in you. The analogy I'm trying to think of is like a thunderstorm. On the one hand, you're drawn to it. He'll talk about this fascinating mystery and also this terrifying mystery. You're drawn to it. I like to be on my back deck or front porch and watch the lightning and thunder. But at the same time, you don't want to
get too close.
Go out on top of a hill or wait for a lightning strike or something like that. And so that was also sort of the sense of like, okay, there is a creator, he's in charge, kind of thing. So maybe another analogy would be those who climb mountains know that there are dangers. So like Long's Peak in Colorado, if you want to climb it, you start out at 6 a.m. You better be heading down by noon because thunderstorms are coming in.
Oh, sure.
Or scuba divers, there's dangers going too deep or coming up too fast. You know the danger. Now, it doesn't keep you from doing those things.
Yeah.
But you're kind of aware, like...
bad stuff can happen, yeah.
I got to take precautions. Yes. And I just don't sense that we have that kind of awareness of God. And I'm not saying that Christians should be afraid of God by any means.
Right.
But there's more this sense like he's in charge, it's his world, and frankly, it can be a little, my life is somewhat contingent.
Right.
I think that's why it's so jarring for people when stuff comes out of nowhere. So you think about like a tornado that pops up in the middle of the night that you don't have any warning about, that it's so shocking because we're so conditioned to feel like we have the control or we have the knowledge to be able to maintain this. And when something shows us that we don't, we're like, wait a minute, how did that happen?
But I was thinking too about this, like in past times, I think something like the pandemic would have elicited a major religious revival.
Sure.
It didn't.
I mean, if anything, it caused people to stay home.
Well, and we figured because we need a vaccine as quick as we can.
Right.
Although, do you think that was also shocking for people to realize how little control? Because I feel like that was another event that demonstrated how little control we had over
it might have.
Nature.
Yeah,
not in a good way necessarily, like driving them back to religion. But
I think you're right.
Like,
it's just that we figured we will get control over it once we can figure out what's causing it and figure out a solution to it. I don't know if this makes sense or not, but that's what I kind of mean is we've lost a sense of what it means to speak of God as the creator. Mm-hmm. And that lies behind all of our talk in redemption.
Sure.
And without it, our talk about redemption and atonement runs the risk of becoming watered down, or sort of milquetoast, or God's about helping me in my personal relationships, or which I don't want to minimize the importance of those at all.
Of course not.
But yeah, I'll leave it there. It's something that I'm pondering, and I'm increasingly thinking that the book of Job may be where we have to turn to recover it, because while Genesis 1 is foundational, you get a picture of more of a harmonious and peaceful creation there. Job shows us a wild creation and a God who delights in a wild creation and a non-human creation. And so I think when we, maybe the closest we can get is when we start thinking about the universe.
Sure.
And just the sheer scale of it, the sheer number of galaxies, the weird stuff that you have in there, from black holes to quasars to pulsars to neutron stars, and how inhospitable it is to us.
Yeah. It's
an inhospitable life. And then the fact that if God is a God of life, you would think life is everywhere. But it seems like it's not.
Seems like.
And what's that say about God?
Yeah.
So I think the Job shows us a picture of maybe call it the wildness of God, or that God likes strange stuff, ostriches who hide their heads and donkeys that kick up their heels, and then the wild oceans. It's
Sure.
like a toddler for God. That he provides a playpen for with the boundaries of the land.
Right. And so it's one of those things again. Here, our audience knows that I studied science in my undergraduate.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about
that. I got a
that.
degree in chemistry, and so I always imagined doing a Genesis 1-6 kind of PhD if I did biblical studies or first article type thing. Where I'm at, you just never know, you never guess. But it is. I spend so much time looking at those types of things just because people will, when they discover a new species in the ocean now, there's TV channels and YouTube and everything else. People are like, oh, that's proof of aliens. It's this alien species. So even beyond Christianity, just to talk about where we are in society, and to speak into what you're saying, is that people have lost their awe of the earth that we live in, and that, yeah, there's a big, massive universe that's chaotic and strange and weird, and they're beginning to realize they don't know everything they thought they knew about black holes.
And the precariousness of our position within it.
And that even with all the things that we've discovered, the ability to come up with a vaccination against a pandemic in less than a year, as to where, again, the back in the Reformation days, the bubonic plague went on and until it ended and wiped out a significant number of the human population at the time. That there's still things here on this earth that is massive, and yet, and the scale of creation is minuscule. That there's still things for us to learn and discover here and now.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful thing. Before, we do have specific topics we want to talk about today. We pressed the button.
Our long introduction.
Exactly.
Yeah, we did.
For both of us, or all three of us, I think. It's just amazing. Before we carry on to our particular topic, because we started a series on the Book of Concord, and that is going to be our main topic. Before we move into that, though, Dr. Arand, we'd like to ask first-time guest, what was your path to ministry? What were things that led, or people who encouraged you to become a pastor?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say there was anything, Damascus Road experience.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, my grandma put the idea into my head when I was about 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom kind of cultivated it. So for my grandma, lifelong Missouri Synod Lutheran, and in some Lutheran families, I suspect like some families of other traditions, maybe like Catholic traditions. So my grandma had two sons, and one son was supposed to become the pastor.
Mm-hmm.
The other son was supposed to be the doctor. Well, both sons went into the family funeral business.
Got it.
So the task of becoming the pastor fell upon her oldest grandson,
Oh.
which was me.
Got it.
So that seed was sort of planted, and like I said, always sort of been with me. I'd always sort of been aiming toward that. Of course, I had some good pastors along the way. I think of the pastor who confirmed me, Dennis Pegorsh. I want to say he's in Tennessee or Kentucky now. And so, I ended up attending Milwaukee Lutheran High School, and I think I was still aiming toward the seminary. Then I went to Concordia College, Milwaukee, when it was still a 2-year school,
Mm-hmm.
to start the languages, Greek and Hebrew, and then from there eventually to the seminary. So I was sort of following the path that the Synod had kind of developed in terms of what was left of the old so-called system.
Sure.
From high school to junior college. I didn't go to senior college.
Okay.
I went to Ann Arbor for 1 year. Then Concordia turned for a year. I came back to Milwaukee largely because Wisconsin had a Wisconsin tuition grant that,
Oh, sure.
and then once I graduated there, I came here.
Yeah. It's one of those things, and so as in recruiting, it's one of those things that I'm beginning to do, and we're trying to plant seeds in like high schoolers and junior high schoolers, and even then it's tough. Like I'll go and speak to a high schooler, and for my sake, and trying to plant new seeds, there's still high schoolers that get to senior year and they don't know what they want to do, and I think sometimes they feel ostracized. It's like, well, how can you be about to go to college and not know what the rest of your life is going to look like? But I like since 5 years old, there are a lot of stories like that, but there are less and less.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I like that idea of planting seeds, because I think sometimes people ask us, what can I do to help? And just that idea of planting a seed and encouraging somebody along the way, that you don't have to be the one to convince them to come here, but starting a seed when it's 5, and you mentioned cultivating it and kind of encouraging it along, that you don't know where those seeds are going to go, but it helps to have it there.
I think the advantage I did have on the cultivation side is that there was also sort of a piety that nurtured it.
Yeah.
Family devotions. I mean, my grandma always had every morning, would maybe have a big breakfast, followed by a devotion, portals of prayer, Bible reading, etc. And so there was also sort of that kind of piety there through most of my childhood that probably nurtured or cultivated
Sure.
that seed.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And when I like that additional piety. Of course, I say of course. Nobody should ever presume anything. But, when you go to school to do a thing and you learn, again, your profs are telling you the forecast of a lack of in-home family devotions and what that does to parishioners and their kids, their spirituality, their faith life. You hopefully don't take the words of wisdom for granted, and you create a devotional life for pastors at home. And so, yeah, we do that. We have children's Bibles. People always ask me for, like, what should I do? When I go to Concordia and I want to be pre-sem, what should I study? Whenever they say theology, I'm like, you can. There's nothing wrong with studying theology in general. I was like, but a major in theology at a Concordia won't like skip the first 2 years of your seminary education. You'll be well versed. Those guys, I was like, but for the smart guys, and even anyway for classes, you end up getting caught up probably to the pre-sem guys at least midway through your second year. Certainly before we go on vicarage, we're all kind of on a level plane by then. If you want to do languages and not take them here, that's a great advantage. But I've begun to tell guys more and more, if you like teaching, study the languages. If you go to Concordia, you're going to take the basic theology classes anyway and do teaching, because that's a skill set that you have a couple classes at the seminary, but not one that we're going to really hone.
Yeah, I agree with you. I majored in the social sciences, psychology and sociology. And when I think of the senior college, I could be corrected here, but they really focused on philosophy and the liberal arts and literature. And things like that, I think, really do help you because, they help you to sort of engage the culture and to interact with the culture. So I have found it to be, I'm not quite sure how to put it. I don't want to say context, but it's always sort of there with me, and it's actually been helpful. One simple example with the social sciences is a recognition that, and sometimes I run into this in Christian circles, that you don't need social sciences to analyze stuff like faith development or however you want to put it. It's simply the Bible or theology. And again, that's playing down, if not demeaning, I think, the first article, because when I think of, say, I don't know if everybody's sociology, but books they've done like analyzing the way faith develops as we progress in age, all it's doing is sort of looking at how we perceive it.
Sure.
It's not saying anything about the Holy Spirit not creating faith or anything like that. It's simply how do I experience that faith?
Yep.
And that's helpful. And frankly, even with psychology, if you study Luther's first commandment and the importance of trust and how no one can live without trust or faith, and that has connections. I don't know if I want to say to Maslow's hierarchy of needs or if it's Erickson.
It's Maslow, hierarchy.
And certainly philosophy helps you then to understand the intellectual currents of the culture.
Sure.
That you're engaging and how to bring the gospel into that. So yeah, I agree with you.
This is an area where I love Luther's explanation to the first article in the Small Catechism, that God has given me my reason and all my senses, that there is no reason as Christians that we have to shut our brains off and not engage with the entirety of creation and everything that God has given to us, because he's developed our senses and he's given things to feed those senses, but he's also given our reason and our brains and intellect and ways to process stuff.
All right, this is where anyway, when Ben is here, he pushes the conversation.
Say, get control of this now.
Yeah, I'm trying. Well, I'm the problem, and that's the problem.
I should have thought about that more, about keeping you along.
So blame Tom, because I asked him.
I was not fully filling Ben's role.
Yeah, exactly. He's supposed to be the task manager. Dr. Arand, if I could ask you this question about the Book of Concord. So me and Ben, again, like I said, we kind of rambled on about it a little bit in the first episode of the series. If I had to ask you, what is the Book of Concord? If somebody came up to you in a parish, you had just been a guest speaker or something like that, and you were talking about something, they say, well, Dr. Arand, okay, like I've seen this book on my parents' shelf. What is it? How would you respond?
Boy, it's going to be hard for me not to ramble on this topic. And so you're putting me on the spot here. I would probably start with the title, Book of Concord.
Sure.
So it is a collection of documents that set forth our confession of who Jesus is and why he matters in a variety of areas of life. And as a result of bringing these documents together, the Book of Concord brought an end to the controversies that had been dividing Lutheran Church for some 30 years and probably hindering its growth and expansion as a result.
You said you were going to ramble on. That was... I don't know if I could say it that way,
Right.
Precisely.
It's a pretty succinct explanation.
Yeah. I mean, and so it is one of those things where, again, you go through and you open it up and it's like, where do you start? And
and some people might be interested to know that it's not just a singular book either. You kind of mentioned the documents. I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, it's a collection of documents that were intended to say, here's what the Reformation is about. Here's what it means to be Lutheran, and here is wherein we find our unity as a church.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, within the collection, you said this earlier, and it's one of those enjoyable things and understanding who's what, right? And so we have these different departments in the seminary, and you would look at a guy like Dr. Jerry Bodie, who we've had on, and he teaches in the history department. Well, when he was doing his PhD work, he did in doctrinal theology. And then you have Dr. Kolb, who teaches very often in the systematics department, but he is very clearly and globally known as a historian. And I
did my STM in the history department.
There we go.
American Lutheran history.
Well, it's just unavoidable because, again, like you said, like doctrinal theology, teaching of what Scripture says, can't ignore what's going on at the time. And so it has to deal with, in real time, it's dealing with like present, which isn't necessarily history, but present history. A present time of the world. But we look back at the Book of Concord, and it is a collection of documents of faith. But you could also, from an academic level, look at it and see historically what was going on during the time of every article that's put into it. And you can see why they were writing, or at least you can begin to say, well, why were they writing this? And then you could then maybe do more historical work into other things that were written around the same time, things that were happening, and see why they're doing this.
Yeah. I don't know that I've done this much, but our conversation is sparking a few thoughts in me, playing off this language of Book of Concord, you could say Book of Unity. And I want to play with that just a little bit because I do think that American Christians, including Lutherans, have lost a sense of the corporate nature of the church.
Right.
I mean, we're very much individualistic, and we may think of individualistic of our identities as individuals, but we're talking here about the church. And the way that they wanted to emphasize their unity as a church shaped the way the documents that they selected. So by including the three ecumenical creeds, it's a way of saying we are in unity with the ancient church. We confess what they did. By including the Augsburg Confession, they're saying there may have been divisions among us as Lutherans, but we all hold to the Augsburg Confession. This is what defines us as a, well, in fact, we would call it the Church of the Augsburg Confession.
Sure.
This is the church that confesses what the Augsburg Confession teaches. And the Augsburg Confession itself, though, sees itself as simply unpacking the creeds.
Right.
And so forth. And then the other documents in there, whether it's the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, the Small Catechism Treatise, or ultimately the Book of Concord, they're just unpacking the Augsburg Confession. So there's a sense where the focus is on the corporate nature of the church, the unit church. We are part of this. And this is part of the early church, and this is part of what grew into the Reformation.
Yeah.
Because that's really the argument of the Reformers, right? Is that we're not making up anything new. We're just, we're trying to confess what the church has always confessed and return from places where we've wandered off.
I agree. And there's a sense where, you know, I had a professor who said, in the confessions, novelty is a dirty word. If it's new, then it's suspect. Now, there's a part where I do fully agree with that. I think there is also a potential risk in focusing on that kind of language that would go like this. We're not going to say anything new or different than what it says. Now, I'm not talking about doctrine.
Yeah.
Right.
But there is, in a sense, new questions that they're taking up.
Right.
Or justification. And there is a sense where they are providing new, not different, but new or fresh ways of talking about justification. So the creeds don't really say anything about the doctrine of justification. They don't really talk about justification by faith or define faith. So it's not like the Reformers could simply quote the early church fathers and leave it at that.
Right.
They had to do the hard work themselves
of
addressing the questions and needs of their day. To be sure, like you said, in continuity with the early church, but it's also more than simply parroting.
Sure.
Well, this kind of goes to your point about not being able to divorce systematics or doctrine from history, that
that's
every
a good point.
Every generation has certain questions that it's asking and answering, and our day has a certain set of questions that it's answering.
That's a really
too.
good point, yeah.
Not only like, go ahead.
Oh, and so you just have to be able to, you know, take what's been passed down and faithfully answer those questions. And try to avoid just a one-size-fits-all approach, too, of saying, well, you know, this is what was said 500 years ago.
Exactly.
Let's try to get a square peg in a round hole.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And I was going to say, we not only have, we have the responsibility for the sake of the people that, I think if we confess this and see what they did, especially why they did it, in particular who they did it for, it wasn't just a matter of showing up the academy.
Right.
This is meant so that the people of the world, but namely the people of the church, can hear about the God who has created, redeemed, and sanctified them in ways that are fresh, but also communicable. And so, like you said, we can't, whenever these new questions come up, we can't just go through here, find kind of the section that it comes from, and then give this to people. No, we have to find this section. We have to see, listen, read, understand what they were saying, and then speak it into today. We have that responsibility.
So they didn't have to deal with environmental questions.
Right.
But when I go to the small catechism, God created me together with all creatures.
Yeah.
Well, there's something I can latch on to.
Mm-hmm.
To affirm, on the one hand, there's a commonality between me and all the creatures. And at the same time, there's a difference between me and all the creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can sort of lean into that in terms of articulating an answer about our relationship to the environment today.
When I would say, because I consider myself an environmentalist because, again, I love creation. So then how do we relate to it? We're part of it, but yet slightly different. Well, God gave man dominion. Well, what is our dominion over the rest of creation looks like? Well, we look to the ultimate example of dominion, Jesus. Well, how did he lord for our sake?
Yeah.
And how does he continue to lord for our sake? And then we don't lord like the earthly kings over the rest of creation. We lord like our ultimate example over the rest of creation,
right,
which is care, compassion, love, a desire to preserve as opposed to just use and abuse, which can be, well, again, different conversation, maybe a different series, but.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, though, as we were talking, as you were talking about our day. I don't know if this works real well or not. You tell me. But one of the things I've been intrigued about, say, by the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, because that's the one document that people probably find most, dare I say, boring, dry, repetitive, you name it. It's probably one of my favorites. So, even though it may be perceived that way, there's an interesting point in Article 20, kind of almost an excursus, where Philip Melanchthon, Luther's lieutenant, you might say, is arguing or has in view the German people and saying, look, I know that the emperor's sword, what's the words, ratting his sword?
Something like that.
Threatening to invade.
Right.
And it could come any time. And if he invades, there's going to be a lot of suffering, loss of life, loss of property. But know this, the confession that we have set forth is solidly grounded in Scripture. And so he's got this, stand firm in the confession, every one of you who has heard the gospel. So there's a sense like that there are these dangers on the horizon, especially the war and the emperor trying to put down the Lutheran Reformation and so forth. And Melanchthon's trying to, in a sense, almost trying to rally the people to say, whatever might come, stand firm. And he does that by, in the Apology, by laying out the scriptural argument, the historical argument for why this confession is the confession you must hold. And so I can't help but think in our day, we're not facing an emperor invading the United States to eradicate the Missouri Synod or something like that. But there are other, maybe more subtle threats, challenges, dangers on the horizon. And one of the challenges I suspect we have is to to prepare our people on how to think about those things, to address those things, to confess their faith, to stand firm in their faith, etc. And so, I don't know, seems somewhat practical to me.
Absolutely.
Well, so with the exception of the creeds, from first document to conclusion or closing statements for the book. I'll say it that way, not conclusion, because the way we're speaking, we're saying it's kind of an ongoing, living thing. It's about 50 years, a little less. And so at the very beginning, there is a preface to the Book of Concord, which is they're beginning with the last thing that they wrote, which is kind of the way I've always kind of understood and looked at is this is kind of them setting the context for potential readers of what it is and why they're doing it.
Yeah. So yeah, the preface to the entire book, you're right, is written about 1580. So it's actually written after all the other documents, and it's written for the book, because before they had the book, they simply said, we hold to the Augsburg Confession, the Apology, the Catechism, the Apology. Now when you gather them together between two covers of one volume, they write this preface. So it starts out with a history of the rise of the Reformation and how the church had lived in darkness, so through the Middle Ages. And then God brought forth the light of the gospel through his servant Martin Luther. And that gospel that Martin Luther delivered was embodied in the Augsburg Confession. So they sort of do this history of the last 50 years, including like the development of the controversies that arose and so forth. There is on the historical side a little bit of a, how shall I say, politics in this. I mean, it's a good reminder the church lives in the world and is dealing with real people. So part of the task of the preface is not only to set forth how all these things arose, but there was one elector or prince. Elector is someone who elects the Holy Roman Emperor. I think there were like 7 of them. There was one who was sort of on the fence post of signing the Book of Concord. I think Ludwig.
Okay.
In his territory, a lot of the pastors were like, well, wait a minute, we like the Ultra Augsburg Confession.
Oh, sure.
Because no one during Luther's time ever saw anything wrong with it, per se. Now, it became a problem when others interpreted it,
Right.
Or misinterpreted it. And so there is a section there where they say, okay, we have no problem with you going with the Ultra Augsburg Confession as long as it's not interpreted contrary to the original.
Oh, right.
And that allowed Ludwig to sign the Book of Concord. He's actually the first signatory. And as a result, you get 3 major, 3 electors, Lutheran electors, all on board. And so that was, again, just another example, like, okay, this is a way we can, I don't know if I want to use the word compromise, but this is a way that we can find a solution without compromising the confession and bring ourselves together.
Yeah, I mean, so they're coming off of, is it the 30 Years' War?
No, that's going to be another 70 years later.
Later. This is, well, it's after, there's the Augsburg Interim.
Right, which is a statement that the emperor drafted that was designed to reimpose the medieval faith upon Lutheran lands.
Right. What is the war that they're coming off of? The name of it? I'm just blanking.
Small Cod War.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, well, the Small Cod War is. Let's not talk about that. The Lutherans lost big time.
Well, sure.
Charles sort of won a decisive victory.
It's like
it's a
talking
historic
about the
event
war,
that's occurring around there. Right?
It's like talking about the War of 1812 in America. We just let it slide. We still have our independence, and that's what matters.
Yeah, right.
But that's the thing. Because we've kind of been talking about this. Pressure creates circumstances, and it has historically. I mean, there's errors and kind of heresies and things that happened in the past that we reject, like Donatism. Donatism,
Yeah.
and things like that, where people left the church and came back to the church because of persecution. And when they came back, the people who stood fast were like, well, wait a second. We stuck through the persecution.
Right,
what are you doing
right.
here? No, you're no longer valid, at least in the specific role that you once held. But because of that, people suffer, people die. And when the sword is at your throat, it's not easy to say. It might be, it's probably easier to say, if you're about to kill me, I'm still a Christian. Probably a little harder to say, I'm still a Lutheran, when a sword is at your throat, if you're not going to die eternally. But then once that happens, and then everybody kind of becomes a little more isolated, and you try to figure things out again, coming back together can almost be more challenging than coming together the first time.
Yeah, it's encouragement or counsel not to think of the Reformation as sort of this golden age when everything was, peaceful and
right.
You're dealing with real flesh and blood people. You're dealing with personalities. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with vested interests and stuff like that. Now, having said that, though, one of the things that has always impressed me is they always had, at the same time, an awesome sense of their responsibility as Christian princes or Christian theologians or Christian pastors. And that sense of responsibility was that they were going to give an account to God one day. Yeah. This gets us back to the Creator, first article. Yeah. And so you mentioned the last page of the Book of Concord. And, on the last page, they're basically saying, we are prepared to answer for what we have confessed here before the judgment seat of Christ. And so there's a real sense of what we're doing here and what we're confessing is serious. It's important. We're handing it down to future generations. Yeah. We're going to have to answer for it to Christ. And I just don't know that it's just a different way of thinking than I suppose we have today. I mean, it's more than a perspective.
Sure.
Well, it's that pressure idea that you were talking about. We haven't had to face a whole lot of pressure to own our confession, probably, that we've received what's been handed down to us, and we've lived in relative
take
peace
it for granted, maybe
related to it. And so, it's easy to take it for granted and just say, well, that's what it is. And you sort of have the cultural Christianity that exists, that we're part of the culture.
So they sort of have it twofold. On one hand, you've got it, say, like with the emperor and the societal culture things, but then there's also, the Last Judgment things.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, and so I don't know, there's certain things that are said in here that we're talking about. So they're talking about the kind of purpose behind it, and they bring up the condemnations, criticisms, and rejections of false, impure teaching. And for the formula of Concord, the Lord's Supper was one of those things, real presence.
That was one of the things that divided the Lutherans,
Right. Anyway, still, but so I'm always a fan of, instead of saying, especially when I'm talking to somebody who's asking me what it means to be Lutheran, a habit, and it's kind of, it's a habit.
I like that.
A habit born of kind of just of certain things is to say what I'm not. Like, I'm not Catholic, I'm not Presbyterian, and then they say, well, what are you? Well, I'm not Episcopalian. I'm not, as opposed to saying what we actually are and what we believe, teach, and confess. It's one of those things where, if you start with that, we believe, teach, and confess, the affirmative, and then say instead it is our will and intention thereby to condemn only the false and seductive teachings and the stiff-necked teachers and blasphemers of the same, whom we will by no means tolerate in our lands, churches, and schools, because they contradict the expressed word of God and cannot coexist with it. And so, again, when we talk about confessions, they're a secondary authority to Scripture. But when they're writing these things, when they're confessing these things, they believe, as do we, I'm assuming, because we're called serving here, that what they're saying is in line with God's word and is informed and structured and normed by it. We keep using this word normed, that the ultimate authority, God, what he's given and revealed to us in his word, teaches what this teaches. Again, not explicitly in entirety. The Book of Concord doesn't teach the entirety of Scripture. It teaches the entirety of specific topics that were relevant to the people of their time.
Right. I mean, the passage you cited highlights the seriousness
Exactly.
of what they're doing, and that these are matters that go to our health, faith, salvation, and so forth. I do think, though, with regard to that passage that you cited, there's also something else at work in terms of what it means to be a theologian. Note that they use a language that they condemn or reject stiff-necked teachers. They're not talking about those who err naively or those who err because they lack the proper training in the language or the right way of talking. There's a pastoral sense there. You know, if a lay person misspeaks, you don't jump down their throats.
Yeah.
Even if another pastor maybe misspeaks or says something wrong, you don't necessarily throw out charges of heresy right away. Stiff-necked implies they're digging in their heels.
Sure.
They are resisting. They refuse to listen. They don't want to talk. I mean, that's who they're talking about. They're not talking about someone who happens to say something that contradicts Scripture, but then you say, did you mean this? Oh, yeah, that's kind of what I meant.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's kind of like the end of Matthew 18, like treat them like a tax collector and sinner after they've refused to be corrected.
You know, I think like even with, and I've sometimes wondered this, you know, Lutherans are strongly against decision theology, obviously. Evangelicals are very strong. But I also have a sense that the average evangelical layperson, when they say, I accepted Jesus in my life, they're in a sense saying that's how they kind of experienced it. They came to faith and then they prayed.
Right.
I don't know that they're making a theological statement. And when you say, well, do you mean that the Holy Spirit brought you to faith? And yeah, that's what I meant. Now, that's different from a theologian who makes a theological or scriptural case for free will prior to conversion. And so these, I think, these are some key Lutheran traits.
Well, we're going to have an episode on the epitome, but the epitome talks about the will that way. The will after the fall, and what is it? It's 4 stages.
Right.
And then after conversion, because of the Holy Spirit, because of new creation, your will is then transformed to be in line with the will of God.
You begin cooperating with the Holy Spirit, to be blunt.
Well, it sounds a little synergistic. But
except that's the actual language. We begin to cooperate with the Holy Spirit.
That's exactly what they say. And then we were talking about this. We pre-recorded an episode that will be released tomorrow, but we were talking about, you know, when you get to language in the Book of Concord that you don't like, you don't reshape it, you don't try to redefine it to make it acceptable to you. You pause and you let it work on you. So when you're like, we're not synergist,
I like that.
And then you get to where the formulas, the writers of the formula say, post-conversion, you cooperate with the Holy Spirit. We're like, well, that's how the synergists talk. Well, they're not talking about the same thing as the synergists. There's only so many words we can use to talk about what we're talking about. So, of course, we're going to use some of the same language.
Synergist is the one who talks about free will prior to conversion.
Exactly. And we're talking about explicitly post-conversion.
Exactly.
And so it's those things where, again, I like the preface because it says the condition, and they're saying all of the things that are contained in here we subscribe to. That they all didn't write from it. Of course, one of the Martins that I'm becoming, I need to become closer and closer to is Martin Chemnitz, who was one of the formula writers, student of Luther. But now, by the time they get into the Formula Concord, Luther has died, kind of the general of the German Lutheran Reformation, and which also causes, because we were all students of Luther, what do we mean? And then Philip Melanchthon is kind of in a different place, and coming up with
Luther is the guy.
Yeah.
And you don't contradict the guy.
Yeah.
But once he dies, it's like,
Now what? Well, you could assume
become more bold.
You could assume his lieutenant knew him best and knew what he meant best, and is gonna just kind of naturally. Well, if Luther's not there, I have the reins because I was second in command, and then you have other people who are like, well, pump the brakes, Melanchthon. You're kind of straying from what the good doctor said, which isn't something I'm going to stray from the preface a little bit. We're getting close to time, I think, for this first session. But again, we're talking about historical documents, subscription. These are the books that we hold together as our Book of Concord, as our Articles of Confession. And yet, throughout history, and even in the time, for instance, we had people who subscribed to the Formula of Concord. And then you had Lutherans who didn't.
Right.
And that's continued to be the case. Those traditions who didn't subscribe to the formula then tend to not now. And you've written a ton of books. I mentioned one, and I only gave Dr. Cole credit when I mentioned it last time, so I'll give you credit for being a co-author of The Genius of Luther's Theology. Anyway, it's a great book, and then you guys highlight some great things of Martin Luther. But another book that you wrote, not a systematic book, a historical book, is
Testing the Boundaries.
Testing the Boundaries is, what is it, Windows of American Lutheranism?
Yeah.
And so you just kind of walk people through what American Lutheranism was like. And so because we're talking about the preface, the collective of the Lutheran Church and their agreement to particular articles of faith, can you just briefly highlight, in comparison, the importance of the preface then, now? I mean, then when they were putting this together, our Book of Concord, to what it's looked like in America and how it's shaped. Because it always shocks people when you say, well, the LCMS, we weren't the first Lutherans here. We were actually quite late to the Lutheran game in America, right. And so it already took shape. Help our understanders understand why the preface would be such an important document for us, as opposed to, say, the kind of the first American Lutheranisms that were trying to find their space in the world for their time.
I may have to give that a little thought. That's a bit of a challenging question. Certainly, those who came over to America had a number of challenges. One, separation of church and state.
Sure.
So the state did not support the church. It did not legitimize or legalize one particular denomination or religion. Whereas in Europe, Catholics had legal recognition. Lutherans acquired legal recognition in 1555. Calvinists acquired legal recognition with the Peace of Westphalia, if I recall. But folks like the Anabaptists, Mennonites, they never got legal recognition. And so they tend to be persecuted both by the state and by the church. So now you come to America and you don't have that church-state connection. And so Lutherans are having to figure, and when you had that church-state connection, there was sort of a legal dimension to subscription.
I was going to say, that's a second kind of component to some of these documents, right?
It wasn't just a churchly
legal
thing,
confession
but
of faith.
The prince said, you're going to subscribe if you want to be a pastor in my territory.
That's true.
Okay. And you don't have that when you get to America, and so now Lutherans are having to sort of think, so what does subscription mean? And how do we appropriate and make use of these confessions in this new context?
Yeah.
And given the fact that there are also 400 years of separation, and you're dealing maybe with some assumptions like you had among early Lutherans in the East. Well, I think about it, once it became English, there were no Lutheran materials in English.
Right.
You don't have Luther's works translated until the 20th century into English. Small Catechism, maybe 1817, Augsburg Confession, about the same time. And that's about it. So you're relying on English materials for theological training, and that leads in any number of different directions. So when those kind of get established, and then you're thinking, well, maybe in America, fresh start, we can have sort of a unique American, I shouldn't say unique, an American Lutheranism, maybe an American Christianity that isn't burdened by the conflicts of the church in the old world.
Right.
And so those kinds of things factor into like, okay, so what do we do with these? Are they simply going to perpetuate the old battles or distinctions, or hinder the growth of the church in America and the possibility of Samuel Simon Schmucker, for example, is the one who had this vision of an American Lutheranism, or maybe even a pan-Protestant unity.
Sure.
And that could be achieved in America where it had not been achieved in Europe. So all those things are kind of feeding into Lutherans struggling to figure out, what do we do with these documents? How do we appropriate them?
Yeah.
And that gives rise to different answers.
Sure.
Yeah, there's so much that goes on there. We could go a lot of different directions with that. I've always been fascinated by this question just because I feel like that there's never been an answer to that question about what does it mean to be Lutheran in America. There have just been lots of different pathways, and you seem, even within our own church body, to see a lot of conflict because, in my opinion at least, different people are trying to answer that question in different ways.
At the very least, I was thinking about this the other day. I think I made it a test question, actually. At the very least, I think the doctrine of the church that is provided in the Augsburg Confession of Apology, Article 7, is about the church. Article 15 is about the practices and traditions of the church. Mm-hmm. I think those two places are where you have to start in terms of what is the identity of the Lutheran church.
Right.
Because they make it very clear the identity of the Lutheran church's identity is not defined by ritual, by traditions, or anything like that. It's defined by the promise of the gospel, given the word and sacrament. I mean, that's probably where I would start. Mm-hmm. So where the differences will come in are sort of going to go to the question of Lutheran unity.
Right.
And to that end, they all wrestle with what does it mean to find unity in word and sacrament. Do you define that in a minimalist way, or a maximalist way, etc.? But story for another day.
Sure. Yeah, and it's such an interesting thing because again, on the one hand, they say themselves that the rites and traditions are things that are passed down through history, aren't the things that define us. And yet, when I was going through this term in class, when I was reading the preface, it's one of those things where I used to try to say that the church of today shouldn't be burdened by the context of the Reformation, as in we've inherited a lot of trauma, struggle, challenges, fighting, and things like that. And at what point are we going to let some of that go? But we can't ignore the fact that we've inherited it. And
I agree. You're right.
So we can't let it go. We can continue to wrestle with it.
Yep.
We can continue to deal with it. As I grow up and mature a little bit, it's not about letting it go and forgetting about it. It's not letting it stop us from being the church today and advancing the gospel for the sake of the next generation.
I agree. I wonder if there is a parallel that, I think my ancestors immigrated in the 20th century. But I wonder if there's a parallel that when you move to a city or a state or something, there is a sense where you become part of that city's past history. Mm-hmm. That you, in a sense, inherit as well. And that becomes the context for you as part of that community, wrestling with where do we go forward.
Right.
I mean, does that sort of make sense of what you're talking, or is that where you're heading? Or
I've over the last year, I've been serving a vacancy And as I stepped in, they were still a plant. And then a few months later, they chartered. Well, as they were chartering, many of the members were new to Lutheranism. And when I stepped in, some of them were new to the idea of becoming Lutheran and much more surprised by becoming a member of the LCMS. And then they were like, well, what's the LCMS? And they looked it up and they were like, oh, wait. Because we say a lot of things about a lot of different things. And people, if you haven't grown up in our dear synod, and I say that with all genuineness, we take hard stance against things that are very important. Yeah. And then we struggle to take stance of some things that are very important. We're just not infallible. And so people were picking up on that. And I had to say, wait a second. First and foremost, our stance on everything isn't what makes us Lutheran. The things that make us Lutheran are supposed to help us take those stands.
Oh, nice.
And here are the things that make us Lutheran. And it was the small catechism.
Nice.
Like this is the very basic nature of what we believe. Nice. In these 15 pages. We would talk about the explanations. I was like, we add modern contextual questions that come about from these things. Yeah. I was like, but these things are what we believe, teach, and confess. And once we started going through the small catechism and our understanding, I started, and this is what I love about the small catechism, and I was taking a risk. I was like, I'm not going to start with the 10 Commandments. Not because I'm afraid once we get there, we're going to be afraid of the law, but I wanted them to understand the church's I wanted them to understand who these 10 Commandments were coming from first. Right. This is God, as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and this is what He means for us. And again, these creeds, this Apostles' Creed is Lutheran, but it comes from the church of old, who were struggling. The question of their day was, who is God? And that's why they wrote the creeds and not the Book of Concord. And then once we started thinking about those things, and they were thinking about people who are close to them, who are on the outside, who are they're looking at the 10 Commandments and things like that. And what do we do? It makes it a little more, not easier to deal with, but just more approachable in your faith life. Yeah. It actually makes it something that you can struggle with as opposed to something that you're going to reject.
It occurred to me too, since you deal with prospective students and so forth. Any pastor that goes to a congregation is stepping into the history of that congregation.
Yeah.
Inherits the history of the congregation, the conflicts of that congregation.
Yep.
The emphases of that congregation. You can't ignore it.
No.
But you can't but at the same time, while it shapes you, it doesn't necessarily stop there.
Yeah.
You're living within that even as you're moving forward.
And no matter what you do, you'll be the history for somebody down the road on what they step into also.
Well, and that's exactly what I told him. I was like, all right, so now you're a part of this church, though, and you're looking around and you're seeing things that you don't like. I was like, you're not alone. There are people who can trace their history all the way back to Luther himself. And they look around, and there's things that they're struggling with as well. And I was like, we have a way as a synod of addressing those things. If you want to take part in that, I'll show you the way. I let everybody argue, and I'm perfectly happy dealing with the consequences and living in the reality, the new reality, no matter what that means. Even if it's some things I might disagree with, I tell people all the time, I'm never going to leave the synod, no matter how bad it gets. It's not as, and that's the other thing I told him. I was like, you can make anything look any way you want it. I was like, and if you're only going to look at the parts you don't like, it's going to look terrible. But here's all these other things about not just Lutheranism, but again, about our synod that are good. Some are great. Some are wonderful. And then again, now that you're a part of it, you've inherited all of our blemishes, but you've also inherited this rich history of the gospel that you can only find in confession in this place, I believe. And as you're looking at the blemishes, if you want to do something towards that, if you're going to put energy into that, well, there's a system for that. Yep. And you're now part of the body. You get to try to contribute to it towards those things.
Exactly.
Well, and this last part of the conversation kind of makes me think about how important, first, how overwhelming this book might look when you first pick it up, but how important it is for all people, not just for the pastors to read it and to see it, because it's easy sometimes to get worked up about things that you don't like because you've only gotten the Cliff Notes version, or you haven't seen the full bit. But it's worth everybody's time to take time in it and read it and try to kind of understand what's there and what it is actually that we confess. And I think about how, I think when I was a kid, I sort of knew that this existed someplace, but really wasn't familiar with what was in it until I got here. And there's just a treasure trove of stuff throughout the pages of this book.
And it is very pastoral. Again, everything that they were doing, again, wasn't just to make us think about things, and it wasn't just for the sake of we're smarter than you. It was, there are real people out there.
Exactly.
We're concerned for your soul.
With real problems, and God has called us to care for them. And what we're currently doing, the penance, indulgences, we're not caring for their souls. We are taxing them for something that's been given to them freely already, not by us, by God.
Yeah, well said.
And so that's the heart of it. And so even then, if you're not a pastor, you're not a church worker at all, you read it, hopefully you can then begin to understand maybe your pastor a little bit more and what he's being called to do and is hoping to accomplish is not, there's stuff that come with different contexts and different parishes, but ultimately he's trying to care for your soul and again to assure you and comfort you that no matter your current station or condition of what's going on in your life in the world, that your salvation and your source of all goodness, God, is firm.
Seems like a good place to
wrap up.
Stop.
We put these things together, and I never know. I'm the one who put together. I was like, oh well, the preface is part of the Book of Concord. How much are we going to talk about it? Well, I think we did a good job because it just context scenario.
Exactly.
Tap ourselves on the back a little bit. One thing that happens towards the end of every episode is we have this little segment called "Right for the Picking" or "Leave It on the Tree." Where we just come up with a bunch of random things. And if you like it, it's right for the picking. If you don't like it, it's leave it on the tree. We just go through them. Dale Ward, our producer, sent me some today. I'm just gonna go off of his list because it's actually pretty solid. Thanks, Dale. Okay, so here we go. Right for the picking or leave it on the tree. Oh, this was in a text message. Anyway, cottage cheese. That face tells me it's...
Leave it on the tree.
Leave it on the tree?
I'm all right with it. It's not a go-to all the time, but if we have it at home, I'll eat it.
I'm going to be honest with you. It is leave it on the tree for me as well. It's not like disgusting to me.
Borderline for me.
But I genuinely couldn't tell you the last time I ate cottage cheese and if it was in front of me. If there are other things like people like, it'll be like, sometimes it's part of like a party tray. Interesting. Like I hadn't even thought about that, but when you made that face, I was like, yeah, it's not.
It's a weird texture, and it's a weird thing to eat.
Exactly.
I typically things that come about as byproducts of something else, I usually just leave them alone. Like I get not wanting to be wasteful, and I get a day in the age. In all days and ages, we shouldn't be wasteful, and if we can use something in it, maybe we should. But yeah, cottage cheese is just anyway. If the milk is served its purpose, just let it go.
Let it go. Well, I thought about this one because summer is here, and because my daughters and my wife are obsessed with them. But snow cones.
Ooh, I like those.
Right for the picking.
Yeah, yep. Same here. I don't quite go out of my way for them, but I don't think I've ever lived in a place that has as many snow cone stands as St. Louis, but
it's hot.
Yeah, it is.
It's about to get hot.
It's the place to go.
So like, it's some of them are like Hawaiian shaved ice, which is everybody be like, oh, it's not a snow cone. And like if you grind the ice as opposed to shaving it, you're gonna get a different texture in the snow cone. So like one is fluffy and edible. The other one you pour the syrup on, it gets like hard because it freezes again. And so I guess there is a difference, but I don't know many places that use that really fine crushed ice anymore. Everybody shaves it because they just know better. But yeah, there's like anyway, I'm a big candy person, so if you have something that's very sugary, mine is chocolate. Chocolate is kind of meh to me.
You're all
but
for it.
I'm definitely all for snow cones, yeah, especially on a nice hot summer day.
Well, and I found out because my brother is serving down in New Orleans that New Orleans sort of has that snowy take on snow cones. So they call them snowballs, and it's kind of that finer ground ice, and so that's pretty good too. And there's a place that does that down south on 55. They're like a New Orleans style snowball stand.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. All right. You started talking about New Orleans. I was like, I bet you can get them alcoholic too in New Orleans.
I'm sure you probably could.
For sure. All right, right for the picking or leave it on the tree. Playing golf.
Leave it on the tree.
Not a big golfer?
I tried, at one time, but unless you go on a consistent basis, it's hard to get very good.
Yeah.
It's not cheap.
No.
And I just hate the pressure of having to hit the ball quickly because there are people waiting behind me.
Sure. I respect that.
It's ripe for the picking for me. I enjoy it. I haven't had a whole lot of time to do it lately, it seems like, but we were out at Topgolf last weekend just hitting balls, and that was fun. There's none of the stress or pressure of being in front of people, but yeah, getting out on the course on a nice day, not too hot, and
sure,
enjoying being outside. I'm here for it.
It is leave it on the tree for me. So like you said, like barriers for entry, expense, and things like that, and then once you get out, like I've done scrambles before, and just being one person on the team, I'm always out there just for social purposes. Like somebody's like, let's talk about this thing. Oh, there's this scramble. Come play golf with us. I'm like, if this is how I can gain an ear, fine. And out of the 18 holes and however many shots you have, I might have like 2 that get played, luckily. The last time I went, one was out of the bunker. I tried it again. Anyway. But yeah, it's I would love to. I have an idea of going to Topgolf because it looks fun. I like the idea of golf. But yeah, it's just a little tiny ball. I think it's the most difficult sport in the world, to be honest with you. I don't think anything's harder.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I don't enjoy, and that's watching golf on TV. My dad and grandpa they'll watch golf on TV all the time.
Well,
and
see, I don't mind that.
I think that's boring.
I don't mind that.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. So right for the picking or leave it on the tree, smartphones. As opposed to one that just like makes phone calls and text messages.
It's just a phone.
Yeah.
No opinion.
Yeah. This one came to mind for me because my former associate pastor was on campus a couple of weeks ago for call day because they were getting a new candidate, and he's ditched his iPhone and has gone back to one of those ones that just makes phone calls and does texting. And there was a part of me that was jealous about that, and another part of me that was like, I don't know how I would make it through the week without all of the functions my phone has. So I'd have to say that's ripe for the picking, but with a tinge of regret, probably.
It's right for the pick for me, and I'm not gonna lie. I am all in. I genuinely do not know how I would operate without my phone. Actually, I do know, but luckily it happened we went on vacation. My wife Dorothy, her parents are missionaries in the Dominican Republic. First day, trying to do the cool thing, wear like the lanyard that's waterproof to take pictures of the beach. Got hit by a wave trying to save Johnny. Knocked my phone off my neck. It's somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. That's day 1 of our vacation, and I had my phone it was a new phone all for I think 2 weeks. And the week without my phone on vacation was actually relieving because I did my vacation and wasn't thinking about stuff.
Right.
But I went on a work trip once and forgot my wallet at home. But I had my phone, which has credit card and stuff like that, so it wasn't a big deal. It's such an essential thing for me.
It's too convenient for me to give it up, but
I can't
the distraction part of it sometimes. I'm like, oh, man.
So people like Jeff Gibbs, one emeritus professor, he doesn't even have a cell phone. I admire it. I just can't, me, myself. But anyway. All right. The last one for me, Ripe for the Pickin' or Leave It on the Tree. Oh, this is interesting. Movie soundtracks for just like listening.
Haven't done that.
Okay. Well, just leave it on the tree then. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's straight up movies, I would say leave it on the tree. If it was like a musical or something that told part of the story, maybe I would. But just the movie, like instrumental soundtrack,
Yeah.
I haven't really gotten into.
It's leave it on the tree for me as well. There's a show called Parks and Rec, and there's a character on there, and like he has a CD binder, and he has like house soundtracks, and then he's like, oh, it's like the director's picking his favorite playlist for you. It was lame when he said it in the show, and that's how I feel about him as well. But yeah, they're leaving on.
Hasn't gotten any better.
Nah, because they usually if they have good music, you don't need the soundtrack. You're just gonna get the music. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, my last one, right for the picking or leave it on the tree, mowing the lawn.
Leave it on the tree.
I wondered how you were gonna answer
My
that.
wife loves to mow the lawn.
Oh, I got it. Well, I was going to ask for two reasons.
So it's like,
Right? I'll gladly let her do that.
Interesting thing.
You don't have to do it, do you?
Not anymore. It is. I'll say really. I love cutting the grass. When I was a student here, I worked grounds crew with Gail. Anytime I got an opportunity to cut the grass, I would. When I owned a home and I did have to cut my grass, like in the summer or like or spring when it's raining, I'll do it twice a week. I'm the type of person who has like the perfectly edged sidewalk with the gap and square, and I seed and make my grass nice deep. I took my grass very seriously, but I'm taking your course Theology of Creation this summer. I actually took an elective on it when I was in the MDiv as well, and you were talking about this kind of thing where maybe it was like Francis of Assisi is having a conversation with God, and he's talking about nature and creation.
oh yeah.
And how we're like,
Right.
we no longer appreciate it even with like grass, and he's like, no, like they've put paths over and they cut it down, they don't appreciate creation. So that's, for a second, I thought maybe that might be a reason.
I know I like gardening and
Sure.
everything, and I will admit that when I was in college, I had a job mowing greens
Oh, yeah.
at a golf course.
Oh.
That I enjoyed because it was a job where I was outdoors, it was quiet,
Yeah.
I got to, have this nice riding lawnmower, and that was okay.
Yeah, I know we're supposed to take decisive positions on this. I'm kind of a both and. I love the sort of mindless nature of mowing the lawn, like pop on some music and just don't think about anything. But we're at the part of the year that stresses me out because the grass is growing so fast, and I feel like sometimes I can't keep it to where I want it because it'll grow faster than I have time to get out there and actually mow it.
That's
and
true.
So once we get a little further into the summer and it kind of simmers down, it'll be more
We're
enjoyable.
actually slowly replacing our lawn with flowers or other types of plants.
Sure.
Partly because our backyard is on a hill.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really hard to mow. There's different levels. So the backyard we're getting rid of all the grass. We're keeping the front yard because in a suburb, you got to sort of keep up a grass.
Keep up
Nicely
the
mowed
appearances in the
grass.
front at least.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's all right. Well, we're wrapping up this first session, and I know we talked a lot about a lot of different things, but again, Ben and I kind of opened the idea of Book of Concord last time. This time we were talking about the preface, but again, it's the shape of the Book of Concord. What are we doing here? What's the topic? It's a lot of theology, a little bit of history. God's word is important, the way we systematize it, and then how we apply it. All these things come together, and so snapshot introduction. We're going to talk about it more in our next segment next week, where we're going to dive into the three creeds. And talking about that more in depth, each one. We'll see. I mean, you could talk about one for an entire topic. We're going to attempt to talk about all three, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and things like that for next time. And so if you have your Book of Concord, you're free to open it up and follow along with us, and in your mind, tell us how wrong we are about everything we're saying. If you don't have one and you don't want to make the investment, there's a free edition, bookofconcord.org, that you can go and, like Pastor Schlund said, I encourage you to read it because, again, this is, even if you're not a pastor or teacher, this is what we believe, teach, and confess. So by nature of being a member of the synod, this is also what you believe, teach, and confess. And it would definitely help you in your relationships, not only with the church, but even with those outside of the church. How do you talk about your faith, what you believe, who we are as Lutherans to those around us, because they might become interested. As you're listening, and if you yourself want to come and study the Book of Concord to be a pastor or deaconess, you've been thinking about it, don't think too long, submit a request for information so that we can contact you, have these conversations with you, and walk you through the process, help you in your discernment. If you're not thinking about being a pastor or a deaconess or a teacher, DCE, but there's somebody close to you, you've always said, man, I think they would be a good pastor someday, even if they're 5.
Plant the seed.
Plant the seed. Don't think about it. Just do it. You might be that person who is the little nudge, that little encouragement that they needed to begin to have a conversation and pursue it for themselves. Thank you for joining us today. Next week, the 3 creeds. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time under the fig tree. Take care.